The dust settled as the stagecoach disappeared over the horizon, leaving nothing but the lingering promise of return that Rebecca Richardson knew all too well was likely empty. The year was 1878, and the unforgiving sun of Arizona Territory beat down on her weathered porch in Bentonville, a small settlement that had sprouted like a stubborn weed among the cacti and rolling hills. Rebecca stood motionless, her hand shielding 5-year-old Thomas's eyes from the harsh sunlight as they watched the road together, the same road that had taken her husband away 2 years prior with similar promises of coming back rich from the silver mines. "Mama, will Papa come back today?" Thomas asked, his small voice barely audible above the whisper of the wind through the cottonwoods. Rebecca swallowed hard, her throat dry from more than just the desert air. "I don't know, sweetheart," she replied, running her fingers through his sandy brown hair so like his father's. "But we'll wait a little longer today, just in case." It was the same answer she'd given for months now, the same ritual of standing on the porch after the weekly stagecoach passed, waiting for a man who had become as elusive as rain in summer. Their small ranch sat on the outskirts of town, the nearest neighbor a good mile away. The isolation that had once seemed romantic now felt like a prison sentence, especially with winter approaching and their supplies dwindling. Thomas tugged at her skirt. "I'm thirsty, Mama." "Let's get you some water," she said, taking one last look at the empty road before turning back to their modest home. Inside, the cabin was neat but sparse. Rebecca had sold most of their finer belongings to keep food on the table after the last of her husband's money had run out. All that remained were the essentials: a wooden table with 3 chairs, a small cast iron stove, 2 beds separated by a homemade curtain, and her husband's rifle mounted above the door. As she poured water from the pitcher into a tin cup for Thomas, a sound outside caught her attention: the distinct clop of hooves, but not the hurried pace of the stagecoach. This was slower, more deliberate. Her heart leapt before she could temper her hope. "Stay here," she told Thomas, smoothing down her faded blue dress before stepping onto the porch. Instead of her husband, she found a stranger dismounting from a chestnut mare. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of tan that came from years under the sun rather than weeks. His dark hair was partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and despite the dust covering his clothes, there was something dignified in his bearing. "Madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal kind eyes the color of bourbon. "Name's Wade Foster. I'm looking for the Richardson place." Rebecca tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the door handle behind her. "You found it. I'm Rebecca Richardson." The man Wade nodded solemnly. "I was at the Silver Creek mine with your husband." The world seemed to still around her. 2 years of waiting, of hoping, all crystallized in this moment. Wade looked down at his hat, now clutched between calloused hands. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, madam. There was a cave-in 6 months back. James, he didn't make it out." Rebecca felt her knees weaken, but she remained standing through sheer force of will. 6 months. She'd been waiting for a ghost for half a year. "Mama," Thomas had appeared in the doorway, his small face a picture of curiosity as he studied the stranger. Wade's eyes softened at the sight of the boy. "You must be Thomas. Your pa talked about you all the time." Before Rebecca could respond, the sound of approaching riders filled the air. 3 men on horseback appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust as they raced toward the ranch. Rebecca recognized the center rider immediately: Elias Garrison, the local banker who'd been pressing her to sell the land since James left. "Trouble?" Wade asked, following her gaze. "Of a sort," she replied, pushing Thomas gently back into the house. "Mr. Garrison believes a woman alone can't handle a ranch. He's been persistent." Wade replaced his hat, a subtle transformation coming over him as he turned to face the approaching men. Gone was the messenger of sad tidings, replaced by something harder, more watchful: Mrs. Richardson. Garrison called out as they drew near, his voice carrying an artificial cordiality that made Rebecca's skin crawl. "I see you've got company." "Just passing through," Wade replied before she could speak. Garrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, don't let us interrupt. I just came to remind Mrs. Richardson that her property taxes are due end of month." Would hate to see a widow and child put out in the cold when winter comes. The word widow struck Rebecca like a physical blow. How could he know already? She'd only just learned herself. "I'm not selling, Mr. Garrison," she said firmly. The banker's smile faltered. "Nobody's talking about selling just yet, but you might want to consider your options. A woman alone with a child out here, it's not safe." "She's not alone," Wade said quietly, the simple statement cutting through the tension like a knife. Garrison's eyes narrowed as he studied Wade more carefully. "Don't believe we've been introduced. Wade Foster." "Foster? You wouldn't be that Foster, would you?" "The one they call, 'I'm just a man helping a friend's widow,'" Wade interrupted. "And I'd take it kindly if you'd give Mrs. Richardson time to grieve before pressing your business matters." Something passed between the men, an unspoken exchange that made Garrison straighten in his saddle. "Of course, my condolences, Mrs. Richardson. We'll discuss this another time." With a tip of his hat, he wheeled his horse around, his companions following suit. Rebecca watched them ride away, confusion mingling with her grief. How did he know about James? "News travels fast," Wade said, though something in his tone suggested he didn't believe that any more than she did. "Mrs. Richardson, I made your husband a promise before he died. He asked me to deliver his personal effects and make sure you and your boy were taken care of." "We're managing," she said reflexively, even as she glanced at her weathered home with its leaking roof and the barren fields beyond. Wade's gaze followed hers, taking in the neglected state of the ranch. "Your husband also mentioned you're too proud to accept help even when you need it." Despite everything, Rebecca felt a smile tug at her lips. That did sound like something James would say. "I don't need charity, Mr. Foster. It's not charity I'm offering, it's a debt repaid. Your husband saved my life in that mine. Let me at least fix that roof and help get your fields ready for spring planting before I move on." Thomas had crept back onto the porch and was now staring up at Wade with undisguised curiosity. "Did you know my papa?" Wade knelt down to the boy's level. "I sure did. He was the bravest man I ever met, and he loved you and your mama very much." Thomas's small chest puffed up with pride. "I'm brave too. I help Mama with the chickens and I'm not scared of the dark." "Is that so?" Wade smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "Well, I could use a brave assistant if your mama says it's all right for me to stay a while." Rebecca hesitated. Having a strange man stay on her property would cause talk in town, but the roof did need fixing before winter, and the fields had lain fallow too long. Pride wouldn't keep them warm or fed. "You can stay in the barn," she said finally, "and I'll pay you fair wages for your work." Wade stood, respecting her terms with a nod. "That's agreeable, Mrs. Richardson." "Rebecca," she corrected him. "If you're staying, you might as well use my name." "Rebecca," he repeated, the sound of her name in his deep voice sending an unexpected flutter through her chest that she immediately suppressed. This was about survival, nothing more. As dusk settled over the ranch, Rebecca stood at the stove preparing a simple stew while Thomas peppered Wade with questions about his travels. The stranger answered each one with patient detail, spinning tales of mountains tall enough to scrape the sky and rivers wider than 10 men laid end to end. When Thomas finally succumbed to sleep, Wade helped Rebecca clear the table. "He's a good boy," Wade said, glancing toward the sleeping child. "James never even got to see him walk," Rebecca said softly. "He left when Thomas was barely 3, said the silver mine would set us up for life." She shook her head. "I begged him not to go." "Men get notions in their heads sometimes," Wade replied. "Chase dreams that turn to dust." There was something in his voice that made Rebecca look at him more closely. "You sound like you speak from experience." Wade was silent for a long moment. "I've chased my share of fool's gold, lost more than I've found." "And what brings you to Bentonville besides your promise to my husband?" "Nothing in particular. No place to be, no one waiting." The sadness in that simple statement resonated with Rebecca more than she wanted to admit. "Well, we've got plenty of work for a man with nowhere to be." After Wade retired to the barn, Rebecca sat alone by the window, watching the moonlight cast shadows across the yard. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to truly feel the loss of James. Not just the hope that had sustained her these 2 years, but the reality that he was gone forever. Tears came, silent and cleansing, as she finally accepted her widowhood. The next morning, Rebecca woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch to find Wade already at work on the roof. His shirt draped over the porch railing, muscles flexing in the early morning light as he replaced rotted shingles. Thomas sat on an upturned bucket below, handing up nails from a pouch and looking more animated than he had in months. "Good morning," she called up, shielding her eyes from the sun. Wade paused, giving her a nod. "Hope the hammering didn't wake you." "Wanted to get an early start before the day gets too hot." "It's fine," she replied, suddenly aware of how domestic the scene appeared. A man working on their home, her son eagerly helping. It was the kind of ordinary moment she'd dreamed of sharing with James. The day fell into a rhythm as Rebecca tended to her chores while Wade worked on the roof. By midday, the worst of the leaks were patched, and he'd moved on to mending the broken fence around her small vegetable garden. "Mama, can Mr. Wade take me fishing?" Thomas asked during lunch, his eyes bright with excitement. "He says there's a creek not far with fish this big." He spread his arms wide, making Rebecca smile. "If Mr. Wade has time after his work," she said, glancing at the man in question. "Always time for fishing," Wade replied. "Been too long since I had a good fishing partner." As the days turned into a week, Rebecca found herself watching Wade when he wasn't looking, the gentle way he explained things to Thomas, the quiet efficiency with which he tackled each task around the ranch, the respect he showed her by never presuming or overstepping. There was a mystery to the man that both intrigued and unsettled her. On the 8th day, as they sat on the porch after supper watching the sunset paint the desert in golds and purples, Rebecca finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. "What did Garrison mean when he asked if you were that Foster?" Wade took a long sip from his coffee before answering. "I used to have a reputation, still do in some circles." "What kind of reputation?" "The kind that makes men like Garrison nervous." He set his cup down. "I rode with the law for a time. U.S. Marshal Service, made some enemies. And now I'm just a drifter trying to keep a promise." His eyes met hers. "Nothing more dangerous than that." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching riders broke the stillness. Wade was on his feet in an instant, one hand going to the pistol at his hip that Rebecca had noticed but never mentioned. "Get Thomas inside," he said quietly, his entire demeanor changing. Rebecca didn't argue, hurrying to collect her son, who had been playing with carved wooden animals Wade had made for him. Once inside, she peered through the window to see 4 riders approaching Garrison and his usual companions, plus a 4th man she didn't recognize. Wade stood casually on the porch, but Rebecca could see the tension in his shoulders as the riders drew near. "Evening, Foster," Garrison called out. "Seems you've made yourself right at home." "Just helping with some repairs," Wade replied evenly. "What brings you out this way, Garrison?" The banker smiled, a cold expression that didn't touch his eyes. "Civic duty. Sheriff Blackburn here was mighty interested when I mentioned we had a new visitor in town." He gestured to the 4th rider, a hard-faced man with a silver star pinned to his vest. The sheriff dismounted, his eyes never leaving Wade. "Foster, been a while, Blackburn." Wade's voice was neutral, but his body had gone completely still. "Heard you left the marshals under something of a cloud," the sheriff continued. "Something about excessive force and a dead prisoner." Rebecca felt her breath catch. Wade had been a lawman, yes, but what else hadn't he told her? "Those charges were dropped," Wade said. "As you well know." "Maybe so, but we don't need your kind of trouble in Bentonville." The sheriff's hand rested casually near his gun. "Mrs. Richardson might not know what kind of man she's harboring, but I think it's time she did." Wade's gaze flicked briefly to the window where Rebecca stood watching. "I'm just passing through, Sheriff, helping a widow fix up her place before moving on. See that you do, soon." The sheriff remounted his horse. "And Mrs. Richardson, if you're listening, you do well to be more careful about the company you keep. Foster here has a reputation for leaving bodies wherever he goes." With that parting shot, the men rode away, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Rebecca stepped onto the porch, her heart pounding. "Is that true about the prisoner?" Wade didn't turn to face her. Yes and no. Man was a murderer who'd killed 3 families, including children. He was trying to escape custody, took a hostage. I stopped him. And they discharged you for it. Politics? The word carried a weight of bitterness. His father was a state senator, made a stink, claimed his boy was being brought in alive to stand trial. And was he being brought in alive? Wade finally turned to her, his expression grave. That was the plan until he put a knife to a 12-year-old girl's throat. He paused. I don't regret my decision, but I understand if you want me gone. Last thing you need is more trouble. Rebecca thought of the repairs he'd completed, how Thomas had blossomed in his presence, how much safer she'd felt this past week knowing he was in the barn. Did you really know my husband? Yes, everything I told you about James was true, she nodded slowly. Then you can stay. At least until the work is done. Relief flickered across his face. Thank you. That night, Rebecca lay awake longer than usual, thinking about the man sleeping in her barn. There was more to Wade Foster than he was telling, that much was clear, but her instincts told her he wasn't a danger to her or Thomas. If anything, his presence seemed to be keeping Garrison at bay, which was no small blessing. The following morning, Wade was chopping wood when Rebecca emerged from the house. She watched him for a moment, admiring the controlled strength in each swing of the axe before announcing her presence. I'm going into town for supplies, she said. Would you mind keeping an eye on Thomas? Wade set down the axe. I'd be happy to, but are you sure you want to go alone? Garrison might. I've been handling Elias Garrison for 2 years, she interrupted. Besides, I need to speak with the bank about my husband's accounts, now that I know. She couldn't quite finish the sentence. Understanding crossed Wade's face. Of course, but take this just in case. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small derringer. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. Rebecca hesitated before accepting the weapon. I know how to shoot. James taught me on his rifle. Good. Hopefully you won't need it. She tucked the derringer into her handbag and hitched her wagon, setting off for the short journey into town. Bentonville was modest compared to larger settlements, consisting of a main street with the essential businesses: general store, bank, saloon, sheriff's office, and a small church. As she guided her wagon down the dusty street, she noticed people watching her with unusual interest. News of Wade's presence had clearly spread. Rebecca kept her head high as she tied her horse outside the general store. Inside, the usual friendly chatter died down as she entered. Mrs. Miller, the shopkeeper's wife, was the first to approach her. Rebecca, dear, we've been so worried. When we heard about that gunslinger staying at your place, Mr. Foster is a friend of my late husband, Rebecca said firmly, emphasizing the word late. He's been kind enough to help with repairs to my property. Your late husband, Mrs. Miller's expression softened from suspicion to sympathy. Oh, my dear, when did you hear? Recently. Mr. Foster brought me the news. Word of James's death spread through the store as Rebecca collected her supplies. By the time she finished, the initial wariness had transformed into the community's particular brand of suffocating concern. You must come stay with us, offered Mrs. Patterson, the Reverend's wife. It's not proper for a widow to be alone out there with a strange man. Thomas and I are quite comfortable at our home, Rebecca replied, maintaining her composure. And Mr. Foster stays in the barn. Still, people talk, Mrs. Miller added. And that man, they say he's killed a dozen men or more. Rebecca paid for her purchases. People say a great many things, most of them untrue. Good day, ladies. She left the store with her head high, though her hands trembled slightly as she loaded her supplies. The town's reaction was predictable but no less frustrating. A widow was expected to either remarry quickly or live under the protection of family maintaining independence was viewed with suspicion at best. At the bank, she encountered a different kind of challenge. Mr. Garrison was all politeness as she inquired about James's accounts, but his answers left her cold. I'm afraid your husband withdrew most of his funds before departing for the mines, he informed her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. What remained has been applied to your property taxes, though there's still a balance owing. Rebecca frowned. That's impossible. James said he left enough to cover taxes for at least 3 years. Garrison spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. I can only show you what the ledger says, Mrs. Richardson. He turned the book toward her, pointing to entries she couldn't verify. I want copies of all transactions, she insisted, and proof of how the money was applied. The banker's smile tightened. Of course. That will take some time to prepare. He closed the ledger. While you're here, I should mention that I've had another inquiry about your property, a very generous offer. My land is not for sale. Even if it means saving your son from poverty, winter's coming, Mrs. Richardson. How will you manage alone? I've managed this far, she replied, rising to her feet. Please have those records ready for me by next week. As she left the bank, Rebecca felt a growing certainty that something wasn't right with her husband's accounts. James had been many things: impulsive, ambitious, sometimes foolhardy, but he'd been meticulous with money. He wouldn't have left her with nothing. The sun was high in the sky as she climbed back onto her wagon. As she prepared to leave town, Sheriff Blackburn stepped out of his office, raising a hand to stop her. Mrs. Richardson, a word if you don't mind. Rebecca reluctantly pulled her horse to a stop. Yes, Sheriff. Blackburn approached the wagon, his thumbs hooked in his belt. I feel obliged to warn you about the man you're harboring. Foster isn't just any drifter, he's dangerous. So I've heard, she replied coolly. Yet he's shown nothing but kindness to me and my son. Men like that know how to charm when it suits them, the sheriff countered. Did he tell you why he really left the marshals? Or about the bounty that was on his head in New Mexico territory? This was new information, and Rebecca couldn't prevent a flicker of concern from crossing her face. Blackburn nodded, seeing he'd struck a nerve. Ask him about Cimarron. See if he tells you the truth. With that cryptic comment, he stepped back from her wagon. Be careful, Mrs. Richardson. Good day to you. The journey home seemed longer than usual as Rebecca mulled over the sheriff's words. Doubt crept in despite her best efforts to dismiss it. What did she really know about Wade Foster beyond the kindness he'd shown these past days? As she approached her ranch, she saw Thomas and Wade by the corral. Wade was showing her son how to throw a lasso, his patience evident even from a distance as Thomas's clumsy attempts fell short. The boy's laughter carried on the wind, a sound so rare these past years that it made her heart ache. Wade spotted her wagon and waved, his smile genuine as he helped Thomas coil the rope. Whatever his past might hold, this moment of simple joy seemed real enough. Mama. Thomas called out, running to meet her wagon. Mr. Wade taught me to rope. I almost caught the post. That's wonderful, sweetheart, she said, forcing brightness into her voice as she climbed down. Wade approached more slowly, his eyes scanning her face. Everything all right in town? Fine, she said, not meeting his gaze as she began unloading supplies. Wade took a crate from her hands. Thomas, why don't you go check on those chicken eggs like we talked about? The boy ran off eagerly, leaving them alone. What happened? Wade asked quietly once Thomas was out of earshot. Rebecca busied herself arranging items in the wagon bed. The sheriff mentioned something about Cimarron and a bounty. Wade went still, then set down the crate with deliberate care. I see. Were you going to tell me, eventually, if it became relevant? Rebecca turned to face him fully. A bounty on your head seems relevant when you're sleeping 20 yards from my child. Wade's jaw tightened. That bounty was posted by a corrupt land baron who didn't appreciate me interfering with his business. It was dropped when evidence came to light that he'd bribed officials and murdered homesteaders. And Cimarron, what happened there? A shadow passed over Wade's face. Something I'm not proud of. A job went wrong. People died who shouldn't have. Innocent people. Yes. The admission came without hesitation, his gaze steady on hers. I was young, following orders I should have questioned. It's why I left the marshals even before they tried to push me out. Couldn't stomach that kind of work anymore. The raw honesty in his voice made it hard to maintain her anger. Why didn't you tell me from the beginning? Would you have let me stay if I had? When she didn't answer, he nodded. That's why. I needed to keep my promise to James, and I couldn't do that if you sent me away. Rebecca sighed, some of her tension easing. I don't like being lied to. No more lies, Wade promised. From now on, you can ask me anything, and I'll tell you the truth, no matter how ugly. She studied him for a long moment. Did you really know James in the mine, or was that part of the lie too? I knew him. Everything I told you about how he died was true. Wade reached into his shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is the last letter he wrote. He asked me to deliver it if anything happened to him. Rebecca took the letter with trembling hands, recognizing James's messy scrawl immediately. The paper was worn at the creases, as if it had been opened and refolded many times. "I'll leave you to read it in private," Wade said, picking up the crate again. "I'll finish unloading your supplies." Rebecca nodded distractedly, already lost in the first words of her husband's final message. She walked to the porch and sat down, tears blurring her vision as she read. The letter was brief, but heartfelt. James expressing his love for her and Thomas, his regrets for leaving, his hopes that the mine would finally pay out so he could return home for good. At the end, he'd written, "If you're reading this, it means Wade is looking out for you like he promised. Trust him, Becky. He's a good man despite what others might say. He saved my life once, and I know he'll do right by you and our boy." By the time she finished reading, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard. Wade had finished unloading the wagon and was now sitting with Thomas on the edge of the corral, pointing out constellations as they began to appear in the darkening sky. Rebecca folded the letter carefully and approached them. "Thomas, time to wash up for supper." Her son looked up with pleading eyes. "Just a little longer, Mama. Mr. Wade is showing me the stars." "5 more minutes," she conceded with a smile, then inside. Wade met her gaze, a question in his eyes. Rebecca gave a small nod, her way of saying they were all right. Relief visibly washed over him as he returned to his lesson, pointing out the North Star to an enraptured Thomas. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Rebecca joined Wade on the porch where he sat whittling a piece of wood by lantern light. "It's a horse for Thomas," he explained when she glanced at his work. "To go with those other animals." "He loves those," Rebecca said, settling into the chair beside him. "He's never had many toys." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the scrape of Wade's knife against wood and the distant call of coyotes. "I went to the bank today," Rebecca finally said. "Something's not right with James's accounts. Mr. Garrison claims most of the money is gone, but James wouldn't have left us with nothing." Wade's hands stilled. "Do you think Garrison is stealing from you?" "I don't know. He says James withdrew the money himself, but it doesn't make sense. Banks keep records." "If he's lying, there might be proof. He's preparing copies for me, but I doubt they'll show anything wrong," Rebecca sighed. "Without proof, it's just my word against his." Wade resumed his carving, though his movements were less fluid now. "Garrison seems mighty interested in your land." "Any idea why?" Rebecca shrugged. "It's good grazing land with a reliable water source, better than most in these parts." "Maybe," Wade didn't sound convinced, "or maybe there's something else making it valuable." The thought had crossed Rebecca's mind as well. Like what? Could be anything. "Water rights, mineral deposits, location." Wade blew wood shavings from the half-formed horse. "Might be worth looking into why he's so persistent." Rebecca nodded slowly. "James did mention once that our land sat on some kind of invisible gold, as he called it. I thought he was just being poetic." Wade's eyes sharpened with interest. "Did he say anything more specific?" "Not that I recall. I was pregnant with Thomas at the time, and James was full of grand ideas about our future." She smiled faintly at the memory. He was always dreaming big. "Sometimes those dreams have substance," Wade said thoughtfully. "Would you mind if I took a look around your property tomorrow? Might spot something others have missed." "Feel free," Rebecca replied, curious now herself. "Though I've lived here 5 years and never noticed anything unusual." "Sometimes it takes fresh eyes," Wade said with a gentle smile, "or eyes looking for something specific." The conversation drifted to lighter topics as the night deepened around them. Rebecca found herself relaxing in Wade's company in a way she hadn't with anyone since James left. There was something comforting about his presence, solid and dependable, yet never imposing. As she finally rose to go inside, Wade's voice stopped her at the door. "Rebecca." He rarely used her name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a strange flutter through her chest. "Whatever Garrison is after, I won't let him take it from you and Thomas. You have my word on that." The simple promise carried weight, and Rebecca found herself believing him despite the mysteries still surrounding the man. "Thank you, Wade. Good night. Good night." The following day, Wade spent hours riding the boundaries of Rebecca's property. examining the terrain with methodical care. Thomas accompanied him for part of the journey, proud to show off his knowledge of the land, pointing out landmarks and sharing names he'd invented for various rock formations. Rebecca watched them from the porch during breaks in her chores, struck by how natural they looked together, Wade's patient instruction meeting Thomas's eager curiosity. It was the relationship her son should have had with his father, and the thought brought both comfort and a sharp pang of grief. By late afternoon, Wade returned to the house, his expression thoughtful as he dismounted. "Find anything interesting?" Rebecca asked, handing him a cup of water. Wade drank deeply before answering. "Maybe. There's a depression in the ground about half a mile north of here that doesn't look natural, and the vegetation around it is different, greener, more lush." "That's the meadow," Rebecca said. "James always said it was his favorite spot on the property. He wanted to build us a bigger house there someday." Wade nodded slowly. "Your husband had good instincts. I think there might be an underground water source there, a substantial one." "We already have the creek for water," Rebecca pointed out, confused by his interest. "In Arizona territory, water rights are as valuable as gold," Wade explained. "Especially water that flows year-round. If there's a major underground spring on your property, it could supply water to half the county in dry years." Understanding dawned on Rebecca. "And Garrison would control who gets access to it if he owned the land." "Exactly. He could charge whatever he wanted, make or break every rancher and farmer for miles." Wade's expression hardened. "Men have killed for less." The implications of his words settled heavily between them. Rebecca thought of Garrison's increasingly aggressive tactics, the sheriff's suspicious alliance with the banker, the town's subtle pressure for her to leave her land. "What do we do?" she asked. "First, we confirm it's there, then we make sure your claim to the land is rock solid." Wade hesitated. "But it might get dangerous. Garrison doesn't strike me as a man who gives up easily." Rebecca straightened her shoulders. "This land is all Thomas and I have left. I won't let Garrison take it from us." Wade's expression softened with something like admiration. "You're a remarkable woman, Rebecca Richardson." The compliment caught her off guard, bringing warmth to her cheeks. "I'm just trying to survive." "You're doing a lot more than surviving," he said quietly. "You're thriving despite everything stacked against you. That takes courage." Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, Rebecca felt a connection that went beyond their practical alliance, something deeper and more personal that both frightened and exhilarated her. She broke the gaze first, not ready to examine the feeling too closely. "We should check that spring," she said, her voice more businesslike than she intended. Wade respected her retreat. "Tomorrow we'll need shovels and rope." The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect day for their expedition. Rebecca left Thomas in the care of Mrs. Torres, a widow from a neighboring farm who occasionally helped with childcare. She didn't want her son involved until they knew what they were dealing with. Wade had already prepared the tools they'd need: shovels, rope, canteens, and a long pole for testing depth. They rode together to the meadow, Rebecca leading the way through familiar terrain. The meadow itself was unremarkable at first glance, a gentle depression in the land covered with grass that was indeed greener than the surrounding area. Wade dismounted and began walking the perimeter, occasionally kneeling to examine the soil. "Here," he finally said, pointing to a spot where the grass grew particularly thick. "This is where we'll dig." They worked side by side, removing the top layer of soil to reveal increasingly damp earth beneath. After about 3 feet, water began to seep into their excavation, quickly filling the hole. "That's it," Wade said, an edge of excitement in his voice. "An artesian spring, looks substantial too." Rebecca stared at the water bubbling up from below. "Is this what Garrison is after?" "Almost certainly. In drought years, this spring could be worth more than all the gold in the territory." Wade wiped sweat from his brow. "No wonder he's been so persistent." They filled in the hole to hide their discovery, though Wade collected a sample of the water in a small vial. "Pure and sweet," he commented after tasting it. "This is high-quality water, not mineral-heavy like some springs." As they prepared to return to the house, the sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. Wade motioned for Rebecca to mount quickly, his hand moving to his sidearm. 4 riders appeared at the edge of the meadow garrison, Sheriff Blackburn, and 2 men Rebecca didn't recognize. "Well, well," Garrison called out, spurring his horse forward. "Quite the coincidence finding you two out here. Taking in the scenery," Wade positioned his horse slightly in front of Rebecca's. "Just enjoying the fine weather, Mr. Garrison. Something I can help you with." The banker's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, there is. Sheriff Blackburn has received word that you're wanted in Colorado territory. Something about a bank robbery in Durango." Wade's expression remained neutral, but Rebecca could see tension in his shoulders. "That's interesting, considering I've never been to Durango." "Nevertheless," the sheriff interjected, "I'll need you to come with me while we sort this out." Rebecca spoke up, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is harassment, Sheriff. Mr. Foster has been nothing but helpful to me and my son." "I'm just doing my duty, madam," Blackburn replied, though his eyes held something more calculating. "Mr. Foster knows how this works. Don't you, Foster?" Wade's gaze swept over the 4 men, assessing the situation. Rebecca could see him weighing his options and coming to the conclusion that resistance now would only make things worse. "Seems I don't have much choice," he finally said. "Rebecca, go back to the house. I'll sort this out." "I'll come with you," she insisted. "No," Wade's voice was firm. "Stay with Thomas. I'll be back by nightfall." The confidence in his statement was belied by the look he gave her, one that said he wasn't certain of his return at all. Rebecca wanted to protest further, but the subtle shake of Wade's head stopped her. "Fine," she conceded. "But I expect him back unharmed, Sheriff." Blackburn tipped his hat. "Of course, madam. Just routine questioning." As Wade rode away flanked by the 4 men, Rebecca felt a growing sense of dread. This was no routine questioning, it was Garrison removing an obstacle. The question was whether Wade was being taken to jail or somewhere more permanent. She waited until the men were out of sight before turning her horse toward town instead of home. If Wade wouldn't let her accompany him openly, she'd find another way to ensure his safety. Bentonville was busy with midday activity when Rebecca arrived. She tied her horse outside the telegraph office and hurried inside, where Mr. Jenkins, the elderly operator, greeted her with surprise. "Mrs. Richardson, twice in 1 week, to what do we owe the pleasure?" "I need to send an urgent telegram," she said, pulling out the money she'd set aside for winter supplies. "To the U.S. Marshal's office in Phoenix." Mr. Jenkins raised his eyebrows but asked no questions as he prepared his equipment. Rebecca dictated her message carefully. "Urgent, stop former Marshal Wade Foster detained by Sheriff Blackburn. Bentonville, stop false charges. Suspected, stop possible danger, stop please. Confirm Foster's status and respond immediately. Stop Rebecca Richardson." It cost nearly all the money she'd brought, but Rebecca didn't hesitate. If Wade was truly in danger, official intervention might be his only hope. "How long for a reply?" she asked as she paid. "Depends if anyone's at the office in Phoenix," Jenkins replied. "Could be hours, could be tomorrow." "I'll check back later," Rebecca said, already moving toward the door. "Please flag me down if a reply comes sooner." Her next stop was the sheriff's office, which she found locked and empty. This confirmed her suspicion that Blackburn hadn't brought Wade to town at all. Where, then, had they taken him? As she stood contemplating her next move, a voice called out from across the street. "Mrs. Richardson?" Rebecca turned to see Mrs. Miller waving from the general store. She crossed reluctantly, knowing she couldn't avoid the woman without causing comment. "I heard about your friend being arrested," Mrs. Miller said, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. "Such a scandal, and right after you lost your husband, too." Rebecca bit back a sharp reply. "Mr. Foster hasn't been arrested. The sheriff just had some questions for him." Mrs. Miller looked disappointed at this less dramatic version of events. "Well, that's not what I heard. Mr. Peterson said he saw them taking him out to the old Sullivan mine." Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. "The abandoned mine, why would they take him there?" "Who knows?" Mrs. Miller shrugged. "Perhaps they need privacy for their questioning. There have been rumors about that man, you know. They say he's killed a dozen men." Rebecca hardly heard the rest of Mrs. Miller's gossip, her mind racing. The Sullivan mine had been abandoned years ago after a collapse similar to the one that had killed James. Taking Wade there wasn't about questioning, it was about making him disappear. She made her excuses and hurried back to her horse, formulating a plan as she went. The Sullivan Mine was about 5 miles east of town in the foothills. If she rode hard, she might get there before anything irreversible happened. The sun was past its zenith as Rebecca pushed her horse to its limits, taking the shortest route to the mine. As she approached, she slowed and dismounted, leading her horse into a stand of scrub oak where it wouldn't be easily spotted. The mine entrance was visible from her position, a dark gash in the hillside partially hidden by weathered timbers. 2 horses were tethered nearby, suggesting at least some of the men were still inside. Rebecca retrieved James's rifle from its scabbard on her saddle. She had brought it on impulse, not certain she would have the courage to use it if necessary. Now, feeling its familiar weight in her hands, she hoped that necessity wouldn't arise. She crept closer, using the scattered boulders and scrub for cover. As she neared, voices carried on the dry air garrison's distinctive tone, raised in anger. "Testing my patience, Foster. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Rebecca couldn't hear Wade's response, but whatever he said made Garrison laugh coldly. "Loyal to the widow, are you? How touching. But she'll sell to me eventually, with or without your interference. Once you're gone, she'll have no choice." Rebecca moved closer still, her heart pounding so loudly she feared they would hear it. From her new position, she could see into the mine entrance where Wade was tied to a support beam, his face bloodied but his expression defiant. Garrison stood before him while one of his men, not the sheriff, stood guard at the entrance. "The spring on her land," Wade said, his voice carrying clearly now. "That's what this is really about, isn't it?" Garrison smiled thinly. "Smart man." Yes, the aquifer under Richardson's pathetic little ranch could supply water to the entire county. Once the railroad comes through next year, that water will be worth 10 times the land itself. And you'd control who gets access, Wade concluded, precisely. "Every ranch, every farm, every business will pay for the privilege." Garrison checked his pocket watch. "Blackburn should be back shortly. He's arranging your unfortunate accident." Wade's laugh was short and harsh. "Pretty elaborate scheme for a small-town banker." "Small town today, but with the right investments." Garrison shrugged. "Arizona Territory is the future, Foster. Those who control its resources will control everything." Rebecca had heard enough. She needed to free Wade before the sheriff returned, but the guard at the entrance presented a problem. She would have to draw him away somehow. Retreating silently, she circled around until she was well away from the mine entrance. Then, raising James's rifle, she fired a shot into the air. The crack echoed across the hills, startling birds into flight. She ducked down immediately, watching as the guard rushed out, gun drawn, looking in the direction of the shot. When he was far enough from the entrance, Rebecca fired again from her new position, drawing him further away. With the guard distracted, she darted to the mine entrance, rifle ready. Garrison whirled at her approach, his hand moving to his gun. "Stop right there," Rebecca commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Move away from him." Garrison froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Mrs. Richardson." "This is a surprise." "Untie him," she ordered, keeping the rifle trained on Garrison's chest. "I don't think you understand the situation," Garrison said, his tone reasonable despite the circumstances. "This man is dangerous. The only danger here is you," Rebecca interrupted. "Now untie him, or I swear I'll shoot you where you stand." Something in her voice must have convinced him she was serious, for Garrison moved slowly to comply, loosening the ropes that bound Wade to the support beam. "Rebecca, behind you," Wade suddenly shouted. She spun to see the guard returning, gun raised. In the split second of indecision that followed, several things happened at once. Wade lunged forward despite his partially loosened bonds. Garrison reached for his weapon, and a shot rang out from outside the mine. The guard crumpled to the ground, revealing Sheriff Blackburn standing behind him, his gun still smoking. For one terrible moment, Rebecca thought they were now truly trapped. Then the sheriff did something unexpected. He turned his weapon on Garrison. "That's enough, Elias," Blackburn said, his voice weary. "It's over." Garrison's face contorted with rage. "What are you doing, you fool? We had an agreement." "An agreement to help you acquire land legally," the sheriff replied. "Not to murder people in abandoned mines." He gestured to Rebecca. Mrs. Richardson, please lower your rifle. I'm not here to harm anyone. Rebecca hesitated, looking to Wade for guidance. He nodded slightly and she lowered her weapon, though she kept it ready. Untie him, Blackburn ordered Garrison, who complied with barely contained fury. As Wade rubbed circulation back into his wrists, the sheriff continued. I received a rather interesting telegram from Phoenix an hour ago. Seems Mrs. Richardson here sent an inquiry about your status with the marshals. Wade glanced at Rebecca with surprise and something warmer. Marshal Thompson speaks very highly of you, Foster, Blackburn continued. Says you're one of the best they ever had, despite the circumstances of your departure. Also mentioned there's no warrant for you in Colorado or anywhere else. You knew that already, Wade said, his voice rough from his ordeal. The sheriff nodded. I suspected, but confirmation was helpful in making my decision. Which is, Rebecca asked, still not entirely trusting this sudden change in allegiance. To uphold the law, madam. Blackburn's gaze hardened as he looked at Garrison. Mr. Garrison here has been engaged in fraud, attempted murder, and if my suspicions are correct, possibly actual murder. What are you talking about? Garrison demanded. James Richardson's death, Wade said suddenly, understanding dawning on his face. It wasn't an accident, was it? The sheriff's expression confirmed the terrible suspicion. I've had my doubts for some time. Several miners reported seeing Garrison at Silver Creek the day before the collapse. Never could prove anything until now. Rebecca felt the world tilt beneath her. He killed James for water rights. For the future, Garrison spat, abandoning all pretense. You think small, all of you. That aquifer could make Bentonville the most important settlement in the territory once the railroad comes through. And that justified murder. Rebecca's finger tightened on the rifle's trigger, her grief and rage threatening to overwhelm her reason. Wade moved to her side, his hand gently covering hers on the weapon. He's not worth it, Rebecca. Let the law handle him. After a moment of internal struggle, she nodded, allowing Wade to take the rifle from her trembling hands. Sheriff Blackburn secured Garrison with handcuffs. Elias Garrison, you're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. We'll add James Richardson's murder once we have statements from the miners. As the sheriff led Garrison away, the banker turned back with venom in his eyes. This isn't over. You think a widow and a disgraced lawman can stop progress? The railroad is coming whether you like it or not. Wade placed a protective arm around Rebecca's shoulders. Let's get you home to Thomas. The ride back to the ranch was largely silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Rebecca's mind whirled with the revelation that James's death had been no accident, that he had been murdered for the water beneath their land. The grief she thought she'd processed returned anew, now mingled with anger and a strange sense of vindication. James hadn't abandoned them for riches. He'd been taken from them by greed. Thomas was overjoyed to see them return, oblivious to the day's dangers as he chattered about his adventures with Mrs. Torres. Rebecca hugged him tighter than usual, grateful that at least he had been spared the knowledge of his father's murder. After Thomas was asleep, Rebecca and Wade sat on the porch as had become their custom. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Arizona sky. What happens now? Rebecca finally asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Wade considered the question. Garrison will stand trial. With the sheriff's testimony and the evidence we have, he'll likely hang for James's murder. And the land, the aquifer, it's yours, Wade said simply. You can develop it yourself or partner with someone trustworthy. Either way, it means security for you and Thomas. Rebecca nodded, the future suddenly seeming both brighter and more uncertain. And you, will you stay? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Wade looked out at the darkened landscape, his profile strong in the lantern light. I've been drifting a long time, he said after a moment. Never stayed anywhere more than a few months since I left the marshals. Rebecca felt her heart sink, though she tried not to show it. I understand. You fulfilled your promise to James. Wade turned to her then, his eyes earnest in the dim light. That's not what I meant. I'm saying I've never had a reason to stay anywhere, until now. The implication of his words made Rebecca's breath catch. Wade. I know it's too soon, he continued quickly. You're still grieving James, and Thomas is just getting used to me. I don't expect anything, Rebecca. I just want you to know that I'd like to stay if you'll have me. Help with the ranch with Thomas with whatever you need." Rebecca studied his face, the strong lines softened by genuine emotion, the eyes that had seen too much violence yet still held kindness. In the weeks since he'd arrived, Wade had become essential to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Not just as protection or help around the ranch, but as a friend, a confidant, someone who understood her struggles and respected her strength. "I'd like that," she said softly. "We both would." The relief in Wade's smile was palpable. "I was thinking we could start developing that spring properly. Maybe build a proper irrigation system for your fields." Rebecca smiled at his immediate pivot to practical matters, giving them both space to adjust to this new understanding between them. "That sounds like a good beginning." As autumn deepened into winter, the ranch underwent a transformation. Wade worked tirelessly alongside Rebecca to prepare for the cold months ahead, storing food, reinforcing the barn, ensuring the livestock had adequate shelter. Together, they began the preliminary work on the spring, mapping out how best to utilize this unexpected resource come spring. Sheriff Blackburn kept them informed of developments with Garrison, who was awaiting trial in the territorial prison. Several miners from Silver Creek had come forward with evidence of his involvement in the accident that killed James and 2 others, strengthening the case against him. The town's attitude toward Rebecca and Wade gradually shifted as the truth about Garrison spread. Those who had been quick to gossip now offered support and friendship, though Rebecca remained cautious, not forgetting how easily they had judged her before. Thomas flourished under Wade's guidance, soaking up knowledge about ranching, riding, and the natural world. He still asked about his father occasionally, but the questions came less frequently as Wade's presence filled the void James had left. Rebecca knew Wade would never replace James in her son's heart, nor should he try. Instead, he was creating his own relationship with Thomas based on mutual respect and genuine affection. As Christmas approached, Rebecca found herself happier than she'd been in years, despite the lingering sadness of knowing how James had died. The house was warmer, both literally and figuratively, with Wade's presence. They had settled into a comfortable routine that respected boundaries while acknowledging the growing connection between them. One evening, as they sat by the fire after Thomas had gone to bed, Wade handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It's not Christmas yet," Rebecca protested with a smile. "Consider it an early gift," Wade replied. "Go ahead, open it." Inside, Rebecca found a leather-bound journal. Opening it, she discovered pages filled with Wade's neat handwriting stories about James from their time together in the mine. "I've been writing down everything I remember him saying about you and Thomas," Wade explained as Rebecca brushed tears from her eyes. "I thought you might want to share these with Thomas someday so he knows who his father really was." The thoughtfulness of the gift overwhelmed her. Without thinking, Rebecca leaned forward and pressed her lips to Wade's in a gentle kiss. It was brief, but held the promise of deeper feelings neither had fully expressed. When she pulled back, Wade's eyes were warm with emotion. "I wasn't expecting that." "Neither was I," she admitted with a small laugh. "But I'm not sorry." Wade reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch tender. "I care for you, Rebecca, more than I thought possible after everything I've seen and done, but I don't want to rush you." "You're not," she assured him, covering his hand with hers. "James will always be part of me, part of Thomas, but he'd want us to be happy to move forward. Are you happy, I mean?" Rebecca considered the question, thinking of the months since Wade had appeared on her porch with news of James's death. Despite the grief and danger they'd faced, she had found something she thought lost forever: hope for the future and the possibility of love again. "Yes," she said simply, "I am." The trial of Elias Garrison took place in early spring, drawing attention from throughout the territory. Rebecca testified about his persistent efforts to acquire her land, while Wade provided evidence of the conspiracy to silence him. The miners from Silver Creek gave damning testimony about Garrison's presence at the mine before the collapse and suspicious payments made to the foreman who had died alongside James. When the verdict was announced guilty on all counts, Rebecca felt a complex mix of emotions. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring James back or erase the pain of his loss. "You all right?" Wade asked quietly as they left the courthouse. Rebecca nodded, squeezing his hand. "It's over. We can truly move forward now," and move forward they did. The aquifer beneath Rebecca's land proved even more substantial than initially believed. With Wade's guidance, they developed a fair system for local ranchers to access the water, bringing prosperity to the region while ensuring Rebecca and Thomas would never want for anything. As summer approached, the ranch bloomed under their combined efforts. Fields that had lain fallow now sprouted with promising crops, the livestock had nearly doubled, and plans for a larger house near the spring were taking shape. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Rebecca stood on the porch watching Thomas and Wade return from checking the fences. The boy rode his own pony now, a gift from Wade for his 6th birthday, and his laughter carried across the yard as Wade told him some story, their heads bent close together. The sight filled Rebecca's heart with contentment. This was what she had waited for all those lonely days on the porch, not James's return, which could never be, but the promise of a new beginning, a family rebuilt from the ashes of loss. Wade spotted her watching and waved, his smile visible even from a distance. He said something to Thomas, who promptly spurred his pony into a trot toward the house, eager to share the day's adventures. "Mama," he called as he drew near. "We saw a mountain lion. It was huge, and Mr. Wade said it was just curious about us and we shouldn't be scared." Rebecca raised an eyebrow at Wade as he approached at a more sedate pace. "A mountain lion, just a young one, keeping its distance," Wade assured her, dismounting smoothly. Good learning opportunity for the boy. Thomas was already racing toward the chicken coop, eager to collect eggs for the morning, as was his daily chore. Wade watched him go with obvious affection before turning back to Rebecca. "I've been thinking," he said, taking her hands in his. "A dangerous pastime," she teased, recognizing the serious glint in his eye. Wade smiled. "Maybe so. I've been thinking about us, you, me, Thomas, about the future." Rebecca's heart quickened. "And what have you concluded?" Instead of answering immediately, Wade reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. A ring simple but beautiful, a small sapphire set in silver. "I'm not asking to replace James," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I know he'll always be Thomas's father and an important part of your life. But I love you, Rebecca. I love Thomas like he's my own, and I want to build something permanent with you both, if you'll have me." Rebecca looked at the ring, then at the man holding it, this former lawman who had kept his promise to a dying friend and found a home and family in the process. The man who had stood by her against threats, both obvious and hidden, who had never tried to take control but instead had empowered her to fight for what was rightfully hers. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "We'll have you, Wade Foster, for as long as you'll stay." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home after a long journey. Over his shoulder, Rebecca could see Thomas returning with his basket of eggs, his face lighting up at the sight of them together. "Did you ask her?" The boy called out, running toward them with excitement that suggested this wasn't a surprise to him. Wade laughed, releasing Rebecca to catch Thomas as he launched himself at them. "I did, and she said yes. So you'll be my pa now, for real?" Thomas asked, looking between them with hopeful eyes. "If that's what you want," Wade replied carefully, "I'll never try to take your real pa's place in your heart." Thomas considered this with the solemn thoughtfulness that sometimes made him seem older than his years. "I think I can have 2 pa's," he decided. "One in heaven watching over us, and one here to help with the horses and teach me to shoot." Rebecca laughed through sudden tears, pulling her son and future husband into a tight embrace. This was what James would have wanted for them, not endless grief and waiting, but life continuing with love and purpose. As dusk settled over Bentonville, the 3 of them remained on the porch, Wade's arm around Rebecca's shoulders, Thomas nestled between them. From this vantage point, they could see the road stretching away toward town, the same road Rebecca had watched for so long, waiting for a return that never came. "You know," Wade said softly, When I first rode up and saw you standing here with Thomas watching the road, I made myself a promise." "What was that?" Rebecca asked, leaning into his solid warmth. "That if I stayed, you'd never have to watch that road alone again." He tightened his arm around her, "And I mean to keep that promise." Rebecca smiled, thinking of all the days she'd spent on this porch, waiting and hoping. Those days were behind her now. The future stretched before them, not without challenges, but rich with possibility and love. "I believe you will," she said, resting her head on his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue sky. A year later, on a perfect spring day, Rebecca and Wade were married under the cottonwood trees near the spring. Thomas stood proudly as his mother's escort, delivering her to Wade with all the solemnity the role required before breaking into a grin that matched the joy on both their faces. The residents of Bentonville turned out in force, their initial suspicion of Wade long replaced by respect for the man who had helped bring justice to their town and prosperity to the region. Sheriff Blackburn served as best man, his friendship with Wade having deepened through their shared commitment to upholding the law. As Rebecca and Wade exchanged vows, promising to face whatever the future held together, she thought of how far they had come from that first meeting on her porch. The grief and loneliness that had defined her life for so long had not disappeared. James would always be part of her heart, but alongside it now flourished something equally powerful: a second chance at happiness. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing under lantern light. As the festivities wound down, Rebecca found herself once again on the porch of their home, not the small cabin where she had waited so long, but the new house they had built together near the spring. Wade joined her, carrying a sleeping Thomas who had finally succumbed to exhaustion after hours of excitement. "I'll put him to bed," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple before carrying the boy inside. When he returned, Rebecca was gazing out at the land that had been both her burden and salvation. In the moonlight, she could see the outline of fields ready for planting, the new barn they'd raised with help from neighbors, the spring that had become the lifeblood of the community. "Having second thoughts, Mrs. Foster?" Wade asked, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. Rebecca leaned back against his chest, savoring the solid strength of him. "Not one," she replied, "just thinking about how life takes unexpected turns." "For the better, I hope," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "Definitely for the better." She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the lines of his face, no longer a stranger's but beloved and familiar. "When James died, I thought my life was over. I never imagined I could feel this way again." Wade's eyes, warm with love, held hers in the soft light. "I never imagined I'd find a home, a family. You and Thomas gave me that. We gave it to each other," Rebecca corrected gently. As they stood together on the threshold of their new life, Rebecca thought of all the roads that had led them here, some straight and clear, others winding through darkness and pain. Whatever paths lay ahead, she would no longer travel them alone, no longer stand watching and waiting for happiness to return. It was already here, in the arms of a man who had kept his promise, in the sleeping boy who had gained a second father, in the land that would sustain them for generations to come. Rebecca Richardson Foster had finally stopped waiting and started living again. And no matter what the future held, she would never watch the road alone.